The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Courtroom 7B in the Washington, D.C. Federal Court Building. The room was already filled to capacity by 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled hearing. Reporters filled the back row, their notepads ready. Court officers stood at attention near the walls. The polished wooden benches held a mix of curious citizens, law students, and political observers. Judge Andrew H. Stones entered the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m. He was 62 years old with silver hair and cold blue eyes behind thin-framed glasses. He moved with the confidence of someone who had controlled this room for over 15 years. As he took his seat at the bench, his black robe settled around him like armor. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Andrew H. Stones," announced the court. Officer Greg Mitchell, his voice echoing through the hushed room. The door to the right of the courtroom opened, and Barron Trump entered with his attorney, Paul Johnson. At 20 years old, Barron was tall and slim, dressed in a navy blue suit that looked expensive but conservative. His face showed no emotion as cameras clicked from the press section. He had grown used to being photographed his entire life, but this was different. Today he wasn't just the son of a former president. He was here to answer questions about the charitable foundation he had started after his father left office. "The court calls Barron Trump to the stand," Judge Stones said, his voice all ready, carrying an edge that made several veteran courthouse reporters exchange glances. Barron walked forward and was sworn in by the court clerk. He sat in the witness chair, adjusting his tie slightly, the only sign of nervousness he showed. Paul Johnson, Barron's attorney, stood up. He was 45, with kind eyes and a reputation for being both fair and fierce in court. "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to note for the record that my client is here voluntarily to address questions about the Trump Youth Foundation's activities. There are no charges filed against Mr. Trump or the foundation at this time." Judge Stones looked at Johnson over the top of his glasses. "Your statement is noted, Counselor. However, this hearing will determine if charges should be filed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." In the third row of the gallery sat Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida. She had come to observe the proceedings at the request of a mutual friend of the Trump family. At 57, Bondi had decades of legal experience and had seen many judges in action. Within the first 5 minutes of Judge Stones speaking, her legal instincts were on high alert. She began taking careful notes on a small leather-bound pad. "Mr. Trump," Judge Stones began, leaning forward slightly, "tell the court how a young man your age came to control a foundation with assets exceeding $20 million. Barron leaned toward the microphone. "The Trump Youth Foundation was established with family funds to provide educational opportunities for underprivileged." "I didn't ask for the mission statement," Judge Stones interrupted. "I asked how someone barely out of high school has control of such significant assets." Paul Johnson stood again. "Objection, Your Honor. The question contains characterizations that—" "Overruled," Stones cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Answer the question, Mr. Trump." Barron nodded calmly. "The foundation is governed by a board of 7 directors, including myself. I serve as chairman, but decisions require majority board approval. The daily operations are managed by Mary Wilson, who previously ran educational programs at the Gates Foundation for 12 years. Judge Stones removed his glasses, a gesture the courtroom regulars knew signaled growing irritation. "And what qualifications do you personally bring to this role, besides your last name?" The question hung in the air. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. This was not standard judicial inquiry. It carried personal animosity. "I have a degree in business administration," Barron replied evenly. "I've also worked with several charitable organizations throughout my teens, including—" "A degree?" Judge Stones interrupted again, his voice now carrying a mocking tone. "You graduated just months ago, and working with charities as a teenager generally means showing up for photo opportunities, does it not?" Paul Johnson rose to his feet. "Your Honor, I must object to this line of questioning. It's argumentative and assumes facts, not an evidence." "Sustained," Judge Stones said, surprising everyone. Then he added, "I'll rephrase. Mr. Trump, do you expect special treatment in this courtroom because of your family name?" "No, Your Honor." Barron replied, maintaining his composure. "I expect fair treatment under the law like any American citizen." Something flashed across Judge Stone's face, a brief moment of naked dislike that was caught by several people in the room, including Pam Bondi, who circled something in her notes and continued writing. "Fair treatment," Judge Stones repeated, his voice now openly sarcastic. "When your family has made a mockery of our justice system for years?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Paul Johnson was on his feet immediately. "Objection. Your Honor, that statement is completely inappropriate and prejudicial." "Withdrawn," Judge Stones said without apology. "Let's move to the Foundation's finances." For the next 45 minutes, the judge questioned Barron about every aspect of the Foundation's operations. He repeatedly cut off Barron's answers, twisted his words, and made comments that went far beyond tough questioning into the realm of personal attacks. "Your Honor," Paul Johnson tried again after Judge Stones referred to Barron as Jr. for the third time. "My client's name is Barron Trump, not Jr." "Counsel, I'll address the witness as I see fit," Judge Stones snapped. "Now, Jr., explain to me how someone barely out of high school believes they have the qualifications to run a multi-million-dollar foundation." As Barron attempted to explain the Foundation's professional management team and oversight structures, Judge Stones interrupted him repeatedly. "Speak clearly, please," the judge said when Barron's voice dropped slightly. "Or did they not teach proper elocution at that expensive private school of yours?" Court reporter Lisa Garcia, who had worked in this courtroom for 8 years, kept her eyes on her stenography machine, but her face showed concern. In all her years recording proceedings, she had never witnessed such open hostility from Judge Stones. The bailiff, Frank Peterson, stood a little straighter, watching the scene with a furrowed brow. In the gallery, Pam Bondi had stopped writing and was now typing rapidly on her phone, her expression grim. She caught the eye of District Attorney William Carter, who had slipped into the courtroom during the questioning. He gave her a slight nod, his own face showing similar concern. As the morning wore on, Judge Stones's comments grew increasingly personal. When Barron mentioned the Foundation's scholarship program for first-generation college students, the judge actually laughed out loud. "That's quite the public relations move," he said. "Buying good press runs in the family, I see." The atmosphere in the courtroom had grown tense. Even reporters who were no fans of the Trump family looked uncomfortable at the judge's behavior. This wasn't tough questioning. It was public humiliation. When Judge Stones finally called for a 30-minute recess, Barron stepped down from the witness stand, his face still composed, but slightly pale. Paul Johnson put a hand on his client's shoulder as they walked to the defense table. Pam Bondi rose from her seat and quickly exited the courtroom, phone still in hand. In the hallway, she nearly collided with District Attorney Carter. "Bill," she said quietly, "what we're witnessing in there isn't justice. It's a vendetta." Carter nodded, his expression troubled. "I've known Andrew for 20 years. This isn't like him at all. Something's very wrong here." Bondi held up her phone. "I've just sent documentation to Chief Judge Nancy Miller. This goes beyond tough questioning. It's a clear violation of judicial ethics." Inside the empty courtroom, Judge Stones sat alone at the bench, reviewing his notes. His clerk, Kevin Webb, approached cautiously. "Judge," Webb said, his voice hesitant, "there's a call from Chief Judge Miller's office. They say it's urgent." Judge Stones looked up, annoyance flashing across his face. "Tell them I'm in the middle of a hearing." But something in his eyes betrayed a flicker of worry as he glanced toward the door where Pam Bondi had exited moments before. Judge Stones ignored the message from Chief Judge Miller and returned to the courtroom after the recess with a harder look in his eyes. The gallery had grown even more crowded during the break. Word had spread through the courthouse about the unusual hearing. Several more reporters had squeezed into the back row, and a few other judges had slipped in to observe from the side door. Barron Trump sat at the defense table with Paul Johnson, who was showing him something on a tablet. Barron nodded, his face still calm despite the morning's ordeal. He had been raised in the public eye and had learned from an early age how to hide his emotions. "Court is back in session," announced Greg Mitchell, the court officer. Judge Stones adjusted his robe and picked up a document from his bench. Mr. Trump, let's discuss the scholarship recipients of your foundation. I have here a list of the 20 students who received full college funding last year. Paul Johnson stood up. Your Honor, those records were submitted voluntarily to show the foundation's legitimate charitable work. We're happy to discuss the scholarship program. I'm sure you are, Judge Stone said with a thin smile. It's quite interesting that 5 of these students come from Florida, 3 from Pennsylvania, and 4 from Michigan. All swing states in the last election. Quite the coincidence. The implication was clear. He was suggesting the charity was being used for political purposes. Barron returned to the witness stand. The foundation uses a blind selection process, Your Honor. The review committee doesn't see names, addresses, or any identifying information except academic records and financial need assessments. And who appointed this committee? Judge Stones asked. The board selected them based on their experience in education. The committee includes 3 university admissions directors, 2 high school principals, and a former secretary of education. Judge Stones laughed. Let me guess. All loyal supporters of your father? Objection. Paul Johnson was on his feet. Your Honor is making accusations without evidence and showing clear bias against my client. Overruled, Judge Stone snapped. Your client's foundation operates in the public sphere and deserves public scrutiny. In the gallery, Pam Bondi had returned, now sitting beside District Attorney William Carter. They exchanged concerned glances as the questioning continued. Bondi checked her phone repeatedly, her fingers tapping impatiently against its case. Judge Stones held up a photograph. This is you at the opening of your foundation's first learning center in Detroit. Standing beside you is Albert Morris, who later contributed $2 million to your father's political action committee. Another coincidence? Barron maintained his composure. Mr. Morris has supported educational causes for decades, Your Honor. His donation to the PAC came nearly a year after that photo was taken, and he has no connection to our foundation beyond attending that public event. Do you expect this court to believe there's no connection? Judge Stones asked, his voice rising. That your foundation isn't just another Trump family scheme? Paul Johnson jumped to his feet. Objection. Your Honor is making unfounded accusations and using inflammatory language. Mr. Johnson, if you interrupt me one more time, I'll hold you in contempt, Judge Stones warned. The courtroom fell silent. Even veteran courthouse employees looked shocked. Judges rarely threatened attorneys for making legitimate objections. It was their job to object to improper questioning. In the silence, the side door opened. Chief Judge Nancy Miller stepped in, accompanied by 2 court officers. She was 65 years old, with short gray hair and a commanding presence that came from 30 years on the federal bench. She stood at the back of the courtroom, watching, with a grave expression. Judge Stones either didn't notice her or chose to ignore her presence. He returned his attention to Barron. Your foundation's tax records show a payment of $50,000 to Golden Media Consultants. What services did they provide? They designed our website and online application system for scholarship applicants, Barron answered. Isn't it true that Golden Media Consultants also worked on your father's campaign? They're a large firm with many clients. I wouldn't know all their business relationships. Judge Stones removed his glasses, his face reddening. You expect me to believe you didn't know? The Trump family has been mixing business, charity, and politics for decades. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it, Junior? The disrespect in his voice was unmistakable. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. My name is Barron, Your Honor, Barron said quietly. And I've answered your question truthfully. Your name is the only reason you're not already facing charges, Judge Stones shot back. Any other 20-year-old running a suspicious operation like this would be Judge Stones. A firm voice cut through the courtroom. Chief Judge Miller had moved to the center aisle. A word in your chambers, please. Immediately. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Judge Stones looked startled, then annoyed. Chief Judge Miller, I'm in the middle of an important hearing. This cannot wait, she replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. This court is in recess for 30 minutes. Judge Stone's face flushed with anger, but he stood up. 30-minute recess, he announced curtly. then exited through the door behind the bench. Chief Judge Miller followed him, along with the two court officers. The moment they left, the courtroom erupted in conversation. Reporters rushed out to weigh file updates, while the remaining spectators discussed what they had just witnessed. Pam Bondi approached the defense table where Barron sat with Paul Johnson. "Mr. Trump, Mr. Johnson," she said with a nod. "I'm Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida." "Ms. Bondi," Paul Johnson stood to shake her hand. "Thank you for being here. Your presence has not gone unnoticed." Barron stood as well, extending his hand. "Thank you, Ms. Bondi. My father speaks highly of you. What we've witnessed today is a miscarriage of justice," Bondi said quietly. "I've already contacted several members of the Judicial Ethics Committee. Judge Stone's behavior violates multiple canons of judicial conduct." "Do you think it will make a difference?" Barron asked, his composure finally showing small cracks. "The damage to the Foundation's reputation is already done. Those reporters will write about all the accusations, even though there was no evidence." "Justice sometimes takes time," Bondi replied, "but it does come. Right now, I need to speak. With District Attorney Carter, excuse me." She crossed the courtroom to where William Carter stood talking with another attorney. They stepped into the hallway together, speaking in hushed tones. Meanwhile, in Judge Stone's chambers, the confrontation was heating up. Chief Judge Miller stood facing Judge Stone's across his desk, her expression stern. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Andrew?" she demanded. "I've received 3 separate complaints about your conduct this morning, including one from the Bar Association." Judge Stones loosened his robe. "Nancy, that young man is running a shell charity for political purposes. Someone needs to hold the Trump family accountable." "That's not your job," she said sharply. "Your job is to be an impartial arbiter of the law. Instead, you're conducting a personal vendetta from the bench. I was watching for less than 5 minutes and witnessed at least 4 serious violations of judicial conduct. You're overreacting." "Am I?" She placed a folder on his desk. "These are transcripts from this morning's session. You called him Junior repeatedly despite corrections. You made accusations without evidence. You threatened his attorney for making proper objections, and you made direct derogatory comments about his family." Judge Stone sat down heavily in his chair. "The Trump family has damaged this country. That foundation is just another one of their schemes. If you have evidence of wrongdoing, there are proper channels," Chief Judge Miller said. "But you don't have evidence, do you, Andrew? You have a grudge." Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Judge Stone's clerk, Kevin Webb, entered looking uncomfortable. "Excuse me, Judge Stone's Chief Judge Miller, there's someone here from the FBI who needs to speak with you both urgently." Chief Judge Miller's eyebrows rose. "Send them in." Kevin opened the door wider and FBI agent Laura Powell entered. She was in her 40s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather portfolio. "Judge Stone's, Chief Judge Miller," she nodded to each of them. "I'm Special Agent Powell. I'm here because we've received information regarding potential judicial misconduct that may rise to the level of criminal behavior." Judge Stone's face paled. "What are you talking about?" Agent Powell opened her portfolio. "We have evidence that you received 3 payments totaling $75,000 from an organization called Americans for Judicial Integrity in the past month. This organization is a front for political donors opposed to the Trump family." "That's ridiculous," Judge Stone sputtered. "I've never heard of that organization." "We have bank records, Judge Stones," Agent Powell replied calmly. "And we have text messages between you and George Lawson, the organization's director, discussing today's hearing." Chief Judge Miller looked at Judge Stones with shock and disappointment. "Is this true, Andrew?" In the hallway outside, Pam Bondi checked her watch. The 30-minute recess was almost over, but there was no sign of either judge returning to the courtroom. She smiled slightly as she saw Agent Powell through the window of Judge Stone's chambers. In the courtroom, the 30-minute recess stretched to 45 minutes, then an hour. The spectators grew restless, and rumors spread through whispers. Barron Trump remained at the defense table with Paul Johnson, both men reviewing documents. on tablets and speaking in low voices. Occasionally, people would approach to offer words of support to Barron, who responded with polite nods and quiet thanks. The side door opened, and District Attorney William Carter entered, walking directly to Paul Johnson. He leaned down and spoke quietly into the attorney's ear. Johnson's eyebrows rose and he turned to whisper to Barron, whose composed expression finally broke into momentary surprise before he regained control. At the same moment, Pam Bondi returned to the courtroom with FBI agent Laura Powell. They took seats in the first row behind the defense table. The courtroom buzzed with new energy as people noticed the FBI agent's presence. Court Officer Greg Mitchell approached the center of the room. "All rise," he called out, his voice carrying authority. Everyone stood expecting Judge Stones to return. Instead, Chief Judge Nancy Miller entered and took the seat at the bench. The gallery erupted in surprised murmurs. "Be seated," Chief Judge Miller said. "I am taking over these proceedings effective immediately. Judge Andrew H. Stones has been temporarily relieved of his duties pending an investigation." The courtroom exploded with whispers and exclamations. Reporters rushed to send messages on their phones. Chief Judge Miller rapped her gavel once, and the room fell silent again. "Mr. Trump," she addressed Barron directly, "on behalf of this court, I extend my apologies for the treatment you received this morning. This hearing is adjourned. You are free to go about your business. The Foundation investigation will be reassigned to another judge who will review the evidence properly and fairly." Barron stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. Court is adjourned," Chief Judge Miller announced, then added, "Mr. Johnson, Mr. Trump, Agent Powell, Ms. Bondi, and Mr. Carter, please remain. Everyone else is dismissed." The gallery slowly emptied, though many lingered as long as possible, hoping to catch additional information. Once the room was cleared except for the requested parties, Chief Judge Miller stepped down from the bench and approached them. "What I'm about to share is confidential and part of an ongoing investigation," she said. "Agent Powell, please proceed." Laura Powell opened her leather portfolio. "Mr. Trump, evidence has emerged that Judge Stones has been compromised. We believe he accepted bribes to publicly humiliate you and damage your foundation's reputation." "Why target me?" Barron asked. "I've stayed out of politics. The foundation is nonpartisan. We believe it's connected to the upcoming election," Powell explained. "Your father's potential run has powerful opponents worried. Discrediting his family members is part of their strategy." Paul Johnson shook his head. "Using a federal judge for political attacks crosses every line." "Indeed it does," Chief Judge Miller agreed. "And it won't stand, but we need your help." "What kind of help?" Barron asked. Pam Bondi stepped forward. "We need to catch everyone involved, not just Judge Stones. We believe he's only one part of a larger conspiracy." "The payments to Judge Stones came from an organization called Americans for Judicial Integrity," Agent Powell explained. "It's a shell company that hides the real donors. We need to trace all connections." District Attorney Carter joined in. "We have a plan, but it requires your cooperation, Mr. Trump. And it comes with risks." "What risks?" Paul Johnson asked, his protective instincts kicking in. "Public perception," Bondi answered. "For this to work, we need Judge Stones back on the bench tomorrow, continuing his attack on Barron." Barron's eyes widened slightly. "You want me to be his target again?" "Yes," Chief Judge Miller said. "But this time we'll be recording everything, and you'll be prepared." The group moved to a private conference room down the hall, where they could speak more freely. The room was small but secure, with no windows and a solid door. They gathered around a polished wooden table as Agent Powell laid out documents. "Judge Stones doesn't know we're onto him yet," she explained. "We confronted him about the payments, but he believes it's just an initial inquiry. He's convinced he can explain it away. He's agreed to cooperate with our investigation on one condition," Chief Judge Miller added, "that he be allowed to continue presiding over your case." "He's that determined to attack me?" Barron asked. "It appears so." Powell nodded. "We've discovered text messages between Stones and several political operatives. They're planning to use clips from the court proceedings and attack ads against your family." Paul Johnson looked outraged. That's a complete abuse of the judicial system, which is why we're going to use it against them, Bondi said with determination. If you're willing to help us, Barron. Barron was quiet for a moment, thinking, what exactly would I need to do? Return to court tomorrow, Agent Powell explained. Face Judge Stones again. Let him continue his inappropriate questioning. We'll have recording devices capturing everything. We need clear evidence of judicial misconduct to make our case airtight. But won't that just give them what they want? Barron asked. More footage of me being attacked? Pam Bondi smiled slightly. Not exactly. We're going to give you something they don't expect, a chance to respond effectively. Chief Judge Miller slid a folder across the table to Barron. These are financial records that Judge Stones doesn't know we have. They show the connections between Americans for Judicial Integrity and several political donors who have publicly attacked your family. We want you to study these, District Attorney Carter said. Tomorrow, when Judge Stones makes accusations about your foundation, you'll have factual information to counter with. Won't he just cut me off like he did today? Barron asked. Probably. Agent Powell nodded. But it doesn't matter. We don't need him to let you finish. We just need him to react when you bring up these specific names and organizations. His reaction will prove he's connected to them. Paul Johnson looked through the documents. This is actually quite brilliant. It's a trap. Exactly, Bondi confirmed. But it only works if Barron is willing to put himself through another difficult day in court. Barron took a deep breath and looked at the faces around him. My father always taught me to fight back against bullies. If this judge is abusing his power to attack my family, I want to help stop him. It won't be easy, Chief, Judge Miller warned. He'll likely be even harsher tomorrow, knowing this might be his last chance. I understand, Barron said with determination. I'll do it. The group spent the next 2 hours preparing Barron for the following day's hearing. They reviewed the IDADO documents, practiced potential questions and responses, and discussed various scenarios that might unfold. Agent Powell explained exactly what kind of evidence they needed to capture, while Pam Bondi offered advice from her years as Attorney General. Meanwhile, in another part of the federal building, Judge Andrew Stones sat alone in his office. His computer was open to a news website already running headlines about the unusual hearing. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It's me, he said when someone answered. Things didn't go exactly as planned today. Miller interrupted the hearing. He listened for a moment, then replied, No, don't worry. I've convinced them to let me continue tomorrow. I'll finish what we started. He ended the call and opened his desk drawer, removing a small flask. His hand trembled slightly as he took a drink. Judge Stones had spent 15 years building his reputation on the federal bench. Now he was risking everything on this one case. But the money was too good to pass up, and his hatred for the Trump family too strong to ignore. What Judge Stones didn't know was that every word of his phone conversation had been recorded. The FBI had placed surveillance on his office that afternoon, and Agent Powell was already listening to the recording in a secure room down the hall, a satisfied smile on her face as she heard the judge incriminate himself further. Back in the conference room, Barron checked his own phone and saw dozens of messages from family and friends who had heard about the hearing. He sent a brief text to his father. Everything is under control. Trust me. Then he returned to studying the documents that would help him face Judge Stones again tomorrow. The next morning, courtroom 7B was even more crowded than the day before. News of Judge Stones' unusual behavior had spread through legal circles and media outlets. Security guards had to turn people away at the door once all seats were filled. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next in the case that was quickly becoming a national story. Barron Trump arrived early with Paul Johnson. They sat at the defense table reviewing notes one final time. Barron wore a dark gray suit today, looking older and more serious than he had the previous day. He had spent most of the night studying the documents Pam Bondi and Agent Powell had provided, memorizing names, dates, and connections that would be crucial to their plan. At the back of the courtroom, FBI agent Laura Powell sat in plain clothes, looking like any other spectator. She carried a standard-looking leather briefcase that contained sensitive recording equipment. 2 other agents were positioned strategically around the room, also in plain clothes. Chief Judge Miller had authorized the surveillance operation after reviewing the evidence against Judge Stones. Pam Bondi entered and took a seat directly behind the defense table. She nodded slightly to Barron, a silent message of support. District Attorney William Carter slipped in through the side door moments later, sitting near the front but not making direct contact with anyone from Barron's team. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Court Officer Greg Mitchell called the room to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Andrew H. Stones. Judge Stones entered looking tired but determined. His eyes briefly scanned the packed gallery before settling on Barron with unmistakable dislike. He took his seat at the bench and shuffled some papers before speaking. Yesterday's session was unfortunately cut short, he said, not mentioning Chief Judge Miller's intervention. We will continue our examination of the Trump Youth Foundation and its operations. Mr. Trump, please retake the stand. Barron stood and walked confidently to the witness stand. He was sworn in again by the clerk, then sat with perfect posture, hands folded in his lap. Paul Johnson watched carefully, pen poised over his legal pad. Mr. Trump, Judge Stones began, yesterday we were discussing the Foundation's scholarship recipients. I'd like to turn now to your donors. According to your filings, your largest donor outside your family is Robert Preston, who contributed $1 million last year. What is your relationship with Mr. Preston? Mr. Preston is a longtime family friend who believes in educational opportunity, Barron answered calmly. He has no involvement in the Foundation's operations or decision-making. Isn't it true that Preston Industries received federal contracts worth over $30 million during your father's administration? I wouldn't know about that, Your Honor, Barron replied. I was a teenager during my father's presidency and wasn't involved in government contracting decisions. Judge Stones smiled coldly. How convenient. Let's move on to another donor, Stanley Walsh. His company donated $750,000 to your foundation last year. Did you know that Mr. Walsh recently launched an exploratory committee for a Senate run? No, Your Honor, I wasn't aware of that. So all these political connections are just coincidences? Judge Stones asked sarcastically. Paul Johnson stood up. Objection, Your Honor. You're implying connections without establishing any evidence of wrongdoing. Overruled, Judge Stones snapped. I'm establishing a pattern. This was the moment Barron had been waiting for. Following the plan they had developed, he shifted slightly in his seat and spoke clearly, his voice carrying throughout the courtroom. Your Honor, if you're concerned about suspicious financial connections, perhaps we should discuss Americans for Judicial Integrity and their $75,000 payment to a federal judge last month. The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Stones's face drained of color. His hands gripped the edge of the bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. What did you say? He asked, his voice barely controlled. Americans for Judicial Integrity, Barron repeated calmly. It's strange that an organization supposedly dedicated to judicial ethics would make such large payments to someone in a position to influence cases against certain families. Judge Stones slammed his hand down on the bench. That is completely irrelevant to these proceedings. You will not make unfounded accusations in my courtroom. Isn't that exactly what you've been doing to me, Your Honor? Barron asked, his voice still calm. The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Stones banged his gavel repeatedly. Silence, he shouted. One more word from the gallery and I'll clear the room. Paul Johnson stood. Your Honor, my client is simply responding to the pattern of questioning you established. If political connections are relevant to this inquiry, then all political connections should be examined. Judge Stones pointed at Johnson. You are dangerously close to contempt, Counselor. With respect, Your Honor, Johnson continued undeterred. My client has answered all questions truthfully. Now he's raising legitimate concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Barron spoke again before Judge Stones could respond. I also find it interesting that George Lawson, the director of Americans for Judicial Integrity, exchanged text messages with certain judicial officials about using court proceedings for political attack ads. Judge Stone's face now flushed dark red. How dare you? This hearing is about your foundation's activities, not about fabricated conspiracy theories. At the back of the courtroom, Agent Powell nodded slightly to her colleagues. They were getting exactly the reaction they needed. Judge Stone's was unraveling on the record, showing his bias and connection to the very organizations Barron was naming. Your Honor, Barron continued, the Trump Youth Foundation has helped over 200 students attend college who couldn't otherwise afford it. We've opened learning centers in 5 underserved communities. Our financial records are transparent and available for legitimate investigation. I came here voluntarily to answer questions because I believe in the work we're doing. Enough, Judge Stone shouted. You don't get to make speeches in my courtroom. You've allowed him to make speeches, Paul Johnson pointed out, gesturing toward the judge. You've made numerous speeches yourself during these proceedings, many containing unfounded accusations against my client. The situation was spiraling out of Judge Stone's control. He could feel it happening but seemed unable to stop himself. His hatred for the Trump family and his fear of being exposed were overwhelming his judicial training. This hearing is about corruption in your foundation, he said, pointing at Barron. Not about me or any other organizations. If we're discussing corruption, Barron replied evenly, then perhaps we should talk about Martin Cole's donation of $50,000 to a certain judge's vacation property fund last summer. This was another name from the documents Bondi had provided. Martin Cole was a major donor to Americans for Judicial Integrity, who had indeed made a personal gift to Judge Stone's disguised as a property investment. Judge Stone stood up abruptly, his face now purple with rage. This hearing is adjourned. Until further notice, Mr. Trump, you are dismissed. He banged his gavel and stormed toward his chambers. As he reached the door, it opened from the other side. Chief Judge Nancy Miller stood there with 2 U.S. Marshals. Andrew, she said quietly, I need you to come with me now. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Judge Stone's froze, looking from Chief Judge Miller to the Marshals and back again. For a moment it seemed he might try to push past them. Then his shoulders slumped. This is a mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We have the recording of your call yesterday, Chief Judge Miller told him quietly. And we've traced the payments. It's over, Andrew. One of the marshals stepped forward. Judge Andrew Stones, you're being detained pending charges of judicial misconduct, accepting bribes, and abuse of power. The courtroom erupted again as people realized what was happening. Reporters rushed for the doors, eager to break the story. Spectators stood on their seats to get a better view as the marshals escorted Judge Stones through a side door. At the defense table, Barron exhaled slowly, the tension of the confrontation finally showing on his face. Paul Johnson patted his shoulder. You did well, he said. Very well. Pam Bondi approached them, a satisfied smile on her face. Perfect execution, she said to Barron. You baited him exactly as we planned. Will it be enough? Barron asked. Agent Powell joined them, closing her briefcase. More than enough. We have him on record reacting to specific names he shouldn't have recognized unless he was involved. Combined with the financial evidence and his phone calls, it's an airtight case. District Attorney Carter came over as well. This goes beyond judicial misconduct. We're looking at criminal charges now, and not just for Stones. We'll be investigating everyone connected to Americans for Judicial Integrity. Chief Judge Miller returned to the courtroom and approached their group. Mr. Trump, she said formally, on behalf of the federal judiciary, I apologize for what you've endured. Judge Stone's actions reflect badly on all of us who wear these robes. Thank you, Your Honor, Barron replied. I still have faith in our justice system. As they spoke, a court officer approached Chief Judge Miller with an urgent message. She read it quickly, her eyebrows rising in surprise. It seems Judge Stones is already talking, she told the group. 2 days after Judge Stone's arrest, Barron Trump sat in a large conference room at the Department of Justice. The walls were lined with American flags and portraits of former attorneys general. The long wooden table could seat 20 people, but today only 7 were present. Barron sat between Paul Johnson and his older brother Eric, who had flown in from New York immediately after hearing about the courtroom drama. Across from them sat District Attorney William Carter, FBI Agent Laura Powell, Pam Bondi, and Chief Judge Nancy Miller. The investigation is moving faster than we expected, Agent Powell explained, opening a thick folder. Judge Stones broke down completely during his first interview. He's given us names, dates, bank accounts, everything. He claims he was pressured into targeting you, Carter added, looking at Barron. Says they approached him 3 months ago with information about gambling debts he'd been hiding. Blackmail, Eric Trump said, shaking his head. They found someone with a weakness and exploited it. Exactly, Powell nodded. Stones admits he received $75,000, but the total operation was funded with over $2 million. They had plans to target other Trump family members and associates in similar ways. Barron looked troubled. So this was just the beginning? Unfortunately, yes, Pam Bondi confirmed. They called it Operation Family Business. The goal was to damage the reputation of everyone close to your father before next year's election. We've already arrested 5 people connected to Americans for judicial integrity. Agent Powell continued. George Lawson, their director, was taken into custody last night. Martin Cole and 3 other major donors are being questioned today. Paul Johnson studied a document from the folder. This goes beyond dirty politics. This is criminal conspiracy. Chief Judge Miller nodded gravely. The damage to our judicial system is incalculable. A federal judge accepting bribes to target a specific citizen undermines everything we stand for. What happens now? Barron asked. Judge Stones has agreed to plead guilty to multiple federal charges, District Attorney Carter explained. In exchange for his cooperation, he'll likely serve 5 to 7 years. The others involved will face various charges depending on their level of participation. And the foundation? Barron asked. Judge Stones made serious accusations about our work. Those accusations have been thoroughly discredited, Bondi assured him. In fact, the investigation into your foundation is officially closed. We found nothing improper in any of your operations. Eric put a hand on his younger brother's shoulder. Dad always said the foundation was your best idea. Now everyone will see why. Barron nodded, looking relieved but still concerned. The damage to our reputation might be harder to repair than the legal issues. About that, Agent Powell said, sliding a newspaper across the table. This morning's Washington Post. Front. Page. Barron and Eric looked down at the newspaper. The headline read, Federal Judge Arrested for Bribery and Plot Against Trump Family. Below it was a photo of Judge Stones being escorted from the courthouse by U.S. Marshals, and a smaller photo of Barron leaving the courtroom with his head held high. The story has been picked up by every major news outlet, Powell continued. The focus isn't on the accusations against your foundation anymore. It's on the corruption that targeted you. The narrative has completely flipped, Paul Johnson said, with satisfaction. Instead of being portrayed as suspicious, you're now seen as the victim of a corrupt scheme who stood up for himself with dignity. We've also released the full transcript of both hearings, Chief Judge Miller added. The public can read for themselves how Judge Stones behaved and how you responded. The contrast speaks for itself. Barron was quiet for a moment, taking it all in. I never wanted to be in the spotlight this way. The foundation was supposed to be about helping students, not about politics or personal attacks. Unfortunately, carrying your last name means you'll always be a target for some people, Bondi said gently. But how you handled this situation showed real character. You didn't run from the fight. You didn't get emotional or vindictive. You used the truth as your defense. Eric nodded proudly. Dad couldn't stop talking about it when I called him. Said you showed more poise in that courtroom than most politicians show in their entire careers. There's one more thing you should know, Agent Powell said, her expression serious. We found evidence that they were planning to target the scholarship recipients next. They had investigators looking into the backgrounds of several students, hoping to find something they could use to claim the selection process was corrupt. Barron's expression hardened. Those students earned their scholarships. Many of them are the first in their families to attend college. We know, Carter assured him, and they're safe now. The people who were planning this are either in custody or under investigation. What can I do to protect the foundation going forward? Barron asked. I have some suggestions, Bondi replied. First, consider adding more independent oversight to your board. Second, increase transparency even beyond what's legally required. And third, consider working with some prominent Democrats on certain projects. Make it clear that education isn't a partisan issue. Those are good ideas, Barron agreed. I'll implement them immediately. Chief Judge Miller closed her folder and stood up. I need to return to court, but I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Trump. Your willingness to face Judge Stones again, knowing what you'd be subjected to, helped us expose corruption that might have targeted many others. After she left, the remaining group discussed final details of the case. The conversation eventually turned to the future of the Trump Youth Foundation and its upcoming projects. We're opening 2 more learning centers next month, Barron explained, his voice growing animated as he discussed the work he cared about. One in Detroit and one in rural Kentucky. Both areas have high dropout rates and limited resources for college preparation. That's exactly what you should be focusing on now, Agent Powell encouraged. Get back to the real work of the foundation. As the meeting concluded, Barron and Eric thanked everyone for their help and prepared to leave. In the hallway outside, they found a group of reporters waiting. Camera flashes started immediately. Just one statement, Eric advised his younger brother. Short and dignified, then we keep walking. Barron nodded and stepped forward. The reporters fell silent, microphones extended toward him. I came to Washington to answer questions about the Trump Youth Foundation because I believe in transparency and accountability, Barron said clearly. What happened in that courtroom showed that our justice system can be misused, but also that the truth eventually prevails. I'm grateful to everyone who worked to expose this corruption, and I look forward to returning my full attention to helping students achieve their educational dreams. Thank you. He stepped back, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions. Eric put an arm around his shoulders as they walked toward the exit. Perfect, Eric said quietly. Dad couldn't have said it better himself. 3 weeks later, Barron stood on a stage in Detroit, cutting a ribbon at the opening of the foundation's newest learning center. Behind him, a large sign read, Trump Youth Foundation, Building Futures Through Education. The crowd of students, parents, and community leaders applauded as the ribbon fell away. This center belongs to you, Barron told the crowd, gesturing to the modern building behind him. It's a place where dreams can grow, where potential can be realized, and where your future begins. In the audience, a young woman named Michelle Davis watched with tears in her eyes. She was one of the foundation's first scholarship recipients, now in her 2nd year at University of Michigan. Without the scholarship, college would have remained an impossible dream for her. As Barron finished his speech and stepped down to talk with community members, Michelle approached him. Mr. Trump, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. I wanted to thank you for not giving up on the foundation, even when they tried to destroy it. Your scholarship changed my life. Barron smiled, genuinely touched. Thank you for telling me that. This is why we do the work. I saw what happened in that courtroom on the news, Michelle continued. It was wrong how that judge treated you. Sometimes people let politics blind them to what really matters, Barron replied. But what matters is students like you getting opportunities you deserve. As he looked around at the excited students exploring the new learning center, Barron felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. The attack on him and the foundation had been painful, but in the end it had only made their mission clearer and their resolve stronger. In Washington, Pam Bondi sat in her office watching the news coverage of the learning center opening. She smiled as she saw Barron confidently addressing the crowd, showing no signs of the ordeal he had endured. Justice had been served, not just through Judge Stone's arrest, but through the foundation continuing its important work without interruption. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. It's done, she said when the person answered. The foundation is stronger than ever, and those who tried to destroy it are facing justice. Barron handled it perfectly, just like you said he would. On the other end of the line, Donald Trump smiled. That's my son,